Views and opinions expressed in this program do not necessarily represent those of Natural Bridges Media or KSQD's staff, volunteers, or underwriters.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. This is Amy Chen Mills, your host for Moment of Truth this Monday evening, March the 30th. And if you are like me and have been tracking the news across the nation, probably you are absolutely horrified at this time. If you believe in LGBTQ plus rights, if you believe in BIPOC rights, meaning Black, Indigenous, and people of color, if you believe in women's rights, we have a veritable onslaught of legislation in red states across the country that is removing DEI programs in Florida under DeSantis, that is removing African American history studies, that is hell-bent on removing women's studies, Jewish studies, all kinds of studies, study in general, perhaps, across the country, as well as the drag show bans in various states and bans on medical treatment for transgendered youth, as well as book bans. I mean, it is overwhelming, actually, to be looking at the news these days. And I wanted to bring onto the radio and to our listeners out there in KSQD land a couple of guests who might be able to help us understand what is happening. I have two special guests with us this evening that are in different parts of the country for a show called White Christian Supremacy in the U.S., Views from the Inside and Outside. Manny Otiko is with us. Are you there, Manny?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, great. And Manny has worked in media for more than 20 years as a journalist and a public relations professional and has been published in the Riverside Press Enterprise, the LA Sentinel, the LA Wave, the Washington Afro-Am. He has also written for Salon, Atlanta Black Star, Our Weekly, California Black Media and Ebony. He has interviewed Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, who was Chief of Staff to General Colin Powell when he was Secretary of State, and former drug dealer Freeway Rick Ross, and Anthony Ray Hinton, who was exonerated after serving 30 years on death row. Manny Otiko writes an ongoing blog at Medium, which is where I found him because I'm on Medium as well. And when I found Manny's blogs, I was like, oh, here's someone that thinks the way I do. And he writes a lot about white supremacy and racism in the GOP. So thank you for being here, Manny.
Oh, I'm glad to be on the show.
Yeah, and I also have on the show with me Ken Scholes, who is the award-winning author of the internationally acclaimed 5-volume Psalms of Isaak sci-fi series and over 50 short stories. His short fiction has appeared in various magazines and anthologies for the last 20 years and is collected in 3 volumes published by Fairwood Press. Scholes has an eclectic background that includes time logged as a soldier, sailor, and minister in the Southern Baptist Church. Ken's been a performing musician for over 30 years and gigs alone or with others around the Pacific Northwest. He is also an advocate for people living with mental illness, particularly PTSD, and speaks openly about his experiences with it. I will give Ken's website out at the end of the show, but I just wanted to mention the thing that really interested me about having Ken on the show is, Ken, all of your experience in the Southern Baptist Evangelical Church. It looks like a decade or more of being involved pretty heavily with the Southern Baptist Church, including, here's a list, your first altar call in 1976, participating in the Focus on the Family film series, the Billy Graham Crusade, burning Dungeons and Dragons books and materials in 1984. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Writing gospel songs, being trained in all kinds of things. I mean, there's a very long, it's like a 20-point bullet point list of items in terms of your activities and experience within the Southern Baptist Church. You served as a young married's deacon and Sunday school teacher for Calvary Baptist Church. You were in the March for Jesus in 1993. You were in Promise Keepers in 1994. And then finally, you became an Episcopalian in 1999. So I think that it might be nice to start with you, Ken Scholes, former Southern Baptist deacon, preacher, singer, book burner, because we're seeing for those of us who live in blue states and blue areas, it's hard to understand what's happening in these red states, but we do understand that it has to do with Christianity, and in particular, evangelical Christianity. I have some facts about the Southern Baptists, which I can sort of feed into whatever you're talking about when you answer my question, but it is the biggest Protestant denomination in the United States, and it has an interesting history of being pro-slavery and separated from half of itself, I believe, after the Civil War. Can you talk more about the history, Ken, of the Southern Baptist Church?
The history is about 30 years in my rearview mirror now, but
right.
But the basics were that the missionaries they had a convention that was funding missionary work, and there was a decision made by the North to no longer accept funds from slaveholders. It's part of the abolitionist movement, and so the Southern Baptist Convention broke away at that point as a part of the, not after the Civil War, but I think prior or as a part of it.
Okay, and so my understanding is that they continue to support slavery in the South. Most Southern Baptists are in the South, and the name would indicate that. And in terms of what we're seeing with erasing Black history in Florida, for example, erasing other forms of history, the drag bans, the transgender care, is this? I mean, I'm assuming Southern Baptist Church is a part of all this. It's probably not the only church. There's also the Catholic Church, but does this square with your understanding and your history? Like, what did you see when you were in the church that helps you understand why this is happening?
Oh, I would be caught up in all of this if I'd stayed, I think. And, for me, I was being groomed and indoctrinated at an early age. In 1976, I was 8 years old. And I was being told that if I didn't share this with my parents, they were in danger of hell. That's a heavy trip for an 8-year-old kid.
Yeah, I've heard that actually, that happens quite a bit.
Because it's a heartbeat of the message, which is that all humans are lost, and that the only way you can be found is if you accept the blood sacrifice of Jesus and his resurrection and all of the other stuff that goes along with it. And the Southern Baptists are just one part of evangelicalism, but evangelicalism out of the South is certainly rooted in what I would call the cold Civil War that's still going. And for me, the part that I think is scary is that we're in blue states. I'm in a blue state, and I grew up in a blue state. But I grew up in a red zone in a blue state because just about anything that's away from the metro area that's rural is red or deep purple.
What state was that?
Washington State.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Oh, that's interesting. So you became a Southern Baptist in Washington.
In 1976, that altar call was a Southern Baptist church. But then I was unaffiliated, so I ran around with Methodists, Pentecostals, and even tougher Baptists than the Southern Baptists. I became a Southern Baptist in Germany, in West Germany, because they had kind of off-site churches, and they were less liberal than the military churches.
Okay, so you were looking for something more conservative. What is the position on race then? What is the position on Black people and people who are not white? Is that something that's explicitly stated, or is that something that's more under the radar? Or why are we seeing this attempt to ban books that might or ban curriculum that might have to do with being African American?
Well, I know that for me, I was avoiding reading anything that would change my worldview. I didn't want to read something that took away the specialness of Columbus Day and how awesome it was that we made friends with the Native Americans and we all partnered together for this great gift of America that we have. These were beliefs that were deeply entrenched into me as a child,
right,
as a part of my culture and a part of the Christian culture. And then it gets enhanced. No, I don't think the Southern Baptist Convention has a written in. They've got an official apology on record for their founding and how all of these things went down. But I think that it's still a group of people kind of locked in a low level of understanding. I remember my father, who wasn't a Southern Baptist, he was a recovering Mormon, but he showed me parts of the Bible that explained the biblical curse that explained why people of color were treated so poorly. Well, biblical curses don't hold up in the world of cell phones and vaccinations.
So there's a biblical curse in the Bible. I've heard of this. What is
Noah's
that?
son. Noah's son Ham is cursed for looking at his father's penis.
Oh, okay.
There's
I
a
don't
lot
know.
of penis trouble in the Old
That word
Testament.
just came out.
Circumcision, there's a lot of Philistine foreskins being collected by Yahweh proponents. It gets a little
goodness.
weird.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, now I know why Thomas Paine said some things he did about religion. Okay. So this is not surprising to you what's happening. Can we sort of say that?
I'm not surprised because I think that there's a reinforcing of beliefs that are old, very old, lost beliefs around. I mean, most of my ordination questions had to do with the role of women in the church. There was a big fear of uppity women, right? Of which, Amy, you would be the queen of uppity women.
And I will take that. I will wear that mantle with pride.
You should.
I would be the queen of uppity women. Yeah. Okay. Well, so I have another question for you, but I think I'm going to go to Manny. In fact, I have several questions for you. Let's go to Manny Otiko. Manny, I just want to hear your voice and make sure that you're still with us. Hello, are you there?
I'm still here, listening with rapt attention.
Yeah, because you've been following politics for a while now, and I believe you come originally from the UK. Is that right?
Yes, I was born in Nigeria, but I spent the first 2 years of my life until I was like 11 years old in London, and then I moved back to Nigeria, and then when I was 21, I moved to the United States.
When you were 21, and what year was that?
I was way back in 1992.
1992. So you've been tracking things here for some time, and what I see in your blog posts at Medium under Manny Otiko, Otiko, is a real interest in what's happening with the GOP. And you use the term fascist, which we don't always see in the mainstream media, but it's something that I think a lot of us are feeling, that this is all this has a real fascist flavor to it. I mean, I think I felt that in 2016 when Trump was elected. And you write about racism within the GOP. Tell me what you are seeing that's most concerning to you at this time.
Okay, the most disturbing thing I'm seeing right now is when you track fascism and also you monitor what the far right are saying on some of the hate speech websites, is I am seeing the same language used by people on the extreme right, neo-Nazis, white supremacists, neo-Confederates. It's being adopted and mainstreamed into the GOP now. Here's a great example. The Great Replacement theory, it's a conspiracy theory that believes that Jewish people are conspiring to replace white people with people from other parts of the world, such as Africa and the Middle East.
Right, and that was what they chanted in Charlottesville.
Yes, they
Jews
chanted,
will not
Jews
replace.
shall not replace us.
Right,
yes.
right.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that was pretty significant because the Great Replacement conspiracy theory states that Jews read Democrats are replacing white people with black and brown people from other parts of the world.
Oh, wait, hang on a second. Jews read Democrats. That's something that I hadn't made a connection about.
It's a code word. When they mean Jews, they also mean Democrats as well. So, and also when you delve deeper into it, another code word for Jews is global elites. That goes back to the old anti-Semitic conspiracy theory that Jews control the global money field. So when people like Alex Jones use the word global elites, they actually mean Jews.
Yeah, and global cabal, globalists, right?
Yes, globalists too.
Yeah, it's very anti-Semitic, and it's a wonder to me that people have not, like a lot of, for example, Trump supporters and Republicans would still say, oh, Trump's not a racist, he's not anti-Semitic, his son is Jewish. So what do you think is going on there that all these people are able to sort of either not know or pretend not to know that this is, and I'm including DeSantis here because as far as I'm concerned, he's the same as Trump, only maybe a little bit worse,
yes.
Because he's slicker and smoother.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's interesting question because I would say to those people, if you think that Trump is not a racist, he's not anti-Semitic, why don't you ask the people who are being targeted, Black people and Hispanic people and Jewish people, ask them if they think he's a racist or anti-Semitic. Now, I listened to a show called the Stephanie Miller Show, and one of the callers, she's Jewish, her parents are Holocaust survivors, and she said this: it was clear to all Jewish people what Trump was after Charlottesville when he sided with the people who were chanting, "Jews shall not replace us."
Yeah, and actually, I know people whose family perished in the Holocaust in 2016. Who, after Trump was elected, were just on the floor. They were just devastated, because there's a certain, it's not even like what are the policies, it's sort of, well, I guess it is what are the policies, but the policies relate to a certain mindset, where you can see that there's a capacity to be cruel. I think that's what we're looking at, a capacity to be cruel. And maybe, Ken, for example, in a religion, you don't think you're being cruel. Like, for example, with the LGBTQ plus anti-drag legislation, anti-transgendered transition care legislation that's happening now. I mean, Ron DeSantis is threatening to force people to detransition if they've already transitioned. He's also got legislation in the pike that would make it legal for children to be abducted by other family members if their parents are supporting them in being transgendered and making a transition. So how is it that people who are religious, and from your experience, and I know you're not in the Southern Baptist Church right now, but based on your experience, how is it that they don't understand the harm?
Well, I think there's this fear-based and fear-mongering that's happening, where the fear-mongers are playing to the base to get more fear. And it's not, when I was a boy, I've been sexually abused. It wasn't a drag queen. It wasn't a man dressed as a woman in a bathroom. It was family members, right? It was, and that's really where the threat is. And anybody that has the ability to do any basic research knows this.
Yeah.
But there's fear-mongering, and back in the 70s, the fear-mongering was, hey, it's gay people. You can't let them teach. I mean, we barely let them work for the federal government at that point. And so gay people were the big threat against children, to the point where when I reported being sexually abused to my family, I was told, hey, they're just trying to turn you into a gay person. This is how gay people reproduce. And because they can't make children, so they molest children to make other gay people, and that's like top of the gay agenda. I learned when I was 8 or 9 years old.
Okay, so I'm sorry. I know this is a very private. I mean, it's not private anymore, but this is stuff
I talk about. Because it's all tied together. It's all connected.
Okay,
this stuff all happens in that soup.
Okay.
And in that darkness.
Okay, so you were molested, and then you were told that's because somebody was gay, not because they were actually unwell and not able to.
Exactly.
Okay, gotcha.
And it's part of the programming of all of the indoctrinating. If you look at Bill Gothard's basic youth conflicts that I went to as a young man, it taught you that if you listened to music that used a drum in it, you were being groomed for being sexual before marriage.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Well, just real quickly, I have to just remind everyone that you are listening to KSQD, your squid on the dial at 90.7 FM in the Santa Cruz and Monterey Bay areas. We are talking to Manny Otiko, who is a Black journalist based out of Los Angeles, who has an ongoing blog at Medium on racism and the GOP, and also the threat of fascism, and also Russian propaganda. We're going to get into that. And also Ken Scholes, who was in the Southern Baptist Church for over a decade. And Ken is on talking to us about what that experience was like and how the mindset of people in the Southern Baptist Church is influencing the legislation that's coming out across the country right now. If you want to send a question in by email, please do so at email. What is it? Mail? On air at KSQD.org. Sorry, that just slipped my mind. On air at KSQD.org. And you can also call in to 831-900-5773. That's 831-900-5773 if you have a question for these guests that we have on Moment of Truth this evening, or if you have a comment of your own about these topics. So here's a question I want to ask you, Ken, before I forget. I mean, I don't run into a lot of Southern Baptists in my world. However, there are big pockets of California that are very conservative still, where we do have Mothers for Liberty activating, organizing around school boards. I've just been doing some research into this. We are not immune to this kind of thing. Mothers for Liberty is the group that has been behind the book bans that include, when there are gay parents in a book, even multicultural books about different holidays, Jewish holidays and Chinese holidays. I guess what I'm wondering is, even though I don't have a lot of contact, people who are listening may have family members who are in the church, or maybe listening from another state, for example, or, even in the Santa Cruz area, we have people who are actually religious and think this way. I know of a few. How do you have a conversation with someone like this that would go well, that might actually help to change somebody's mind or create at least a little bit more empathy? How did you come out of the church? What was it that got you out?
Well, it was very slow and painful because of how hard it is for us to let go of our ideas and beliefs, right? Our thoughts. We get these thoughts in our head and we don't want to let them go. But it took a lot of love and understanding. It took a lot of people being very patient with me. And a lot of it, it's just understanding wants to rise. I was holding mine down, and I was hanging out with people who wanted mine to stay down. Don't read this. Don't play this game. Don't listen to this music. It will turn you into a bad person, or even worse, a gay person. All of these. There was always the out group at the time was the gay group.
Well, it is
but,
now.
We didn't even consider the trans people at that point because they were so far removed from our view. But for me, it was compassion that helped me out. But it was also I had been exposed to the right information through education, and I just rejected it. But it was still there.
You mean like in college or
in
something?
College? Like I was going to Western Washington University and getting a history major in preparation for seminary. And I had been to hear Maya Angelou speak when I was a young man, wanting to be a writer before the whole religion bug. I went and heard Kurt Vonnegut speak as a young man. I had an English teacher, a closeted lesbian, who took me out of the small logging town to hear these literary greats. And this all stuck. My science professor and my psychology professors in college, it stuck, and I kept my books. And so when I first started therapy, I was seeing a focus on the family therapist. And that was an interesting. It was a hot mess, but it was a start. It was a start because
it was a start. That's interesting.
Yeah, it was a start, and it was a slow start. And so for me, now, from my standpoint, I think it's people who've been there being willing to say, "Hey, I used to think that way, and I get it. I get why you see that, and now I know that I was just scared of something that was really different from me."
Mm-hmm. Interesting, because I have heard from people who talk about cults, and I'm actually on TikTok now quite a bit, and there's this whole trend called evangelicals, where people are talking about coming out of the church, and the Southern Baptist Church is losing membership. Evangelicals are losing membership, which makes me think that part of what's happening is this sort of last gasp, like how do we keep control, over the population somehow? So let's go through government. Kind of like, white supremacists are thinking, well, we're losing control because we're starting to be in the minority,
A fear-based reaction.
Yeah. But so in terms of cults, I've heard that, like, you don't want to just say to someone, you're wrong. How could you be so terribly wrong? What you want to do, tell me what you think about this, Ken, is say, I know that you care. Like, you don't want to start with you're a terrible person. You want to start with, I understand that you care deeply about children or about, our society or about Christ or about God or about love. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think that that's the key, I think, is also to not engage in argument, because there are some people that are, a piece of it is just remembering what the founder of the faith said, which is if they don't want to hear the message, remove the dust from your feet and keep going. And, so some point of it is being kind and being compassionate and not attacking them and understanding how viciously the human ego will protect itself, especially when it's afraid, and to look for common ground. That's why I go in with Mrs. Robinson, right? If I'm playing a bar in a small town, I'm going in with music and little snippets and having a beer at the counter and making friends and looking at it as a long haul. Maybe I'll be in town off and on the next several months.
Oh, you mean because you're trying to establish relationships?
I'm connecting. I'm out in those in the tiny spaces where I'm at. I try to connect because I'm the only Ken that I know. I'm the only ex-Southern Baptist gospel singer, songwriter, turned science fiction writer willing to go out and say I'm an old straight white dude who was terribly wrong. I was terribly wrong. Wow.
So that's what you do when you go around, tour around with your music, is you talk about being an ex-Southern Baptist. Interesting.
All of it. I talk about all of it because it was all connected.
Yeah. I do want to mention that the Southern Baptists, who are now so terribly concerned about grooming children and pedophilia and child abuse, came out with a report last year that was showing that there were like 700 cases of abuse and rape and, child grooming happening within the Southern Baptist Church. I have to give them a little bit of credit for commissioning that report themselves. They voted to commission it. But of course, it ended up that a lot of ministers and youth pastors were all involved in nefarious deeds, shall we say. So, and this is coming out more and more. It's like the one maybe silver lining to all of this is that maybe we as a society get to see what's really happening with everybody, And so I just want to go to Manny and see if there's anything that you want to add to this conversation about racism, because we're talking about LGBTQ plus individuals, and I guess because my heart just goes out to trans people, they're first in the line of attack here, and it's very scary for them in these states. A lot of people are thinking about moving, and people are moving out of these states. What is the situation on the ground, do you think, Manny, for Black people in Florida and other states where we're seeing book bans and trying to erase African American history? And you just reported on, I think, something about a textbook in Florida where it was about
Yes.
Rosa Parks. Can you talk about that?
Yes, they removed the famous incident where Rosa Parks refused to give up a seat for a white person, and they removed that because I guess it would they were scared of offending the state's anti-woke policies, because the anti-woke policies bans the teaching of things such as race in the classroom, which means that a book about Rosa Parks will have the central story of Rosa Parks eliminated from it.
I mean, you have HB 999 in Florida right now that is about eliminating all diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, eliminating Black sororities and fraternities, eliminating Jewish studies, eliminating women's studies, eliminating gender studies. I mean, it's like, what could we even think or say at this time? It's horrifying.
I'd say if it looks like white supremacy and it looks like white supremacy, it is white supremacy.
Right.
But when you go through and eliminate the programs that teach about Black history and programs that refer to Black people, then Black people might sit around and say, this kind of looks like something we've seen before.
Right. Whereas a lot of white people, some white people, I know a lot of liberal or left white people, but I know white people who aren't terribly alarmed. And I'm not sure. I think it has to do with what, they don't have to pay attention, right? Because they're white. I mean, they should be.
Yes.
Do you have any sense of why this would be? Besides the obvious. I guess it's obvious, but I'd love to hear your words.
Well, I think for a lot of people, it's not a problem to touch their doorsteps. And maybe some of the white people, even the white liberals, they all say, well, it hasn't affected me yet, so I don't see why it's a problem. But when it affects you, then it changes. It's a good example of that. We've seen all the furor about Prince Harry and his marriage to Meghan Markle. That was an education for him, because I think until he met her and dated her and saw the reaction from his family, he never really thought about racism. But when he saw it coming from his own family and the pushback, and also the pushback from the British media, which can be pretty awful, he didn't realize, this is real.
Yeah. And I think that was one of the wonderful outcomes of the Black Lives Matter explosion of 2020 was a lot of white people started getting educated and reading books and doing book clubs with books like Caste, which talks about, by Isabel Wilkerson, which talks about how the Nazis actually studied the United States as a way to figure out how to segregate Jews in Germany. In the Nazi period, they were looking to the United States as a model. And I can't tell you, I would just guess that 90% of white people, or maybe 80%, maybe 70% now, maybe 80% don't know that, would never even guess that or think that.
Yes.
You are on KSQD 90.7 FM in the Santa Cruz and Monterey Bay areas. If you want to send us an email with a question, please do so at onair@ksqd.org. That's on air at ksqd.org. Or you can phone in to 831-900-5773. That's 900 KSQD, so that makes it easy. We are talking to a couple of experts in their fields, one a former Southern Baptist of over a decade, and one a black journalist in LA who has been tracking white supremacy and racism in the Republican Party. I want to pivot a little bit and talk about the war in Ukraine. This is where we might get some phone calls because we have a lot of dissension in our town among the left, and you see people on the right. You see people on the right who are now basically publicly pro-Putin at this time. And we've heard these things from, Nick Fuentes, of course, but, Donald Trump was pretty clear that he was in favor of Putin and how he governed and what a leader he was. And we're seeing the same thing from Ron DeSantis. This war in Ukraine, Manny, and also you just wrote about Germany and the coup that almost happened in Germany, I believe in 2020, you wrote on Medium.
Yes.
Tell me how you see Russian propaganda as a part of the whole mess that we're in and how you see the war.
Well, I've learned a lot about Russian propaganda over the last 4 to 5 years.
Yeah, me too.
One thing I've learned about Russians is that they are experts in propaganda. These are people who have PhDs in propaganda. Propaganda was heavily used in the 2016 election.
That's right.
But it was 20th century propaganda. The 20th century propaganda doesn't come through the television or through a newspaper. It comes on the internet.
Right.
And, as you know,
wait, you mean 21st century?
Sorry, 21st century, yes.
Yeah.
21st century, yes. And the main injection point for propaganda was social media, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. And the thing that I realized from my studying of propaganda is that propaganda can be used as a weapon with information warfare.
Yeah, and we've done it ourselves, actually, to be fair. The Central Intelligence Agency has engaged, and the other security agencies from the United States have engaged in this kind of, information warfare in other countries. This is the first time that I've been aware of it happening here. It's probably happened in the past. It actually happened. No, that's not true. It happened in pre-World War II when the Nazis were very much infiltrating the U.S. Congress, paying Congress people to read speeches that they were writing for them. And also, we had the Silver Legion in L.A. This is all in Rachel Maddow's podcast, Ultra, which is a fascinating podcast and very important to listen to right now because a lot of the same things are happening where we're getting Republicans echoing Putin's talking points, but we're also getting leftists echoing Putin's talking points. Tell me, what do you think about this war? People in our community, a lot of them want it to stop. They want to stop sending arms to Ukraine. Tell me what you think.
I think the war in Ukraine is necessary from the point that we are backing the Ukrainians. There are no American soldiers on the ground. And if you look at the war in detail, it's Ukraine, an independent country, a democracy, fighting Russia, which is trying to take them over and erase their country and make them part of Russia. Now, I think that's something that back in the old days, the U.S. used to back, pro-democracy, pro-independence. So we should be on the side of the Ukrainians. And also, if you know anything about Vladimir Putin, he's a former KGB agent, and he's also a former lover of the old Soviet Union.
Yeah.
If you look at any of his speeches and his background, he says that he wants to restore the old Soviet Union to its glory. That means taking back all the old Soviet republics and the countries that used to be part of the old Eastern Bloc. So if he takes Ukraine, he's going to keep going.
Yeah, I that is my thought as well. I think that's the moment that we're in. I mean, a lot of people, I don't know if people remember, I think people who are very politically tuned in would, but Paul Manafort was over in Ukraine ahead of 2016, installing a pro-Russian president in Ukraine with all the tricks and shenanigans that Paul Manafort and people like Roger Stone over here and Alex Jones and all these propagandists used to get someone into power. Then he came over here in 2016 and became Donald Trump's campaign manager. I mean, this is just so clear to me what's going on. These people are aligned with Russia as far as I'm concerned. And
Yes.
and so tell me, because you wrote this very interesting blog about this German coup attempt. Was that Russia funded, or what was the situation?
The German coup attempt, it wasn't Russian funded, but there was similar alliances because the international fascist movement includes Russia, Germany, Britain, Italy, Hungary, and what's another country? One more, Sweden. So these fascists, they're
In
talking to
Sweden,
each
okay.
Yes, that's in Sweden, yes. And these fascists, they're talking to each other. They're sharing messages, they're sharing strategies. And so it was interesting when I did the article about the German far right. What was interesting is that they were using the same messages as the American far right. I was surprised to realize that some of the Germans also believed in QAnon too.
Yeah, a lot of people believe in QAnon. It's become an international phenomena. And one thing that people may not know about QAnon is that the base conspiracy theory that involves pedophilia and blood libel, child abuse and drinking children's blood. I mean, I hate to even say these things, and infect everybody's ears. But this is what QAnon is based upon. It's why we saw that attack on the pizza parlor in Washington, D.C., because people thought that Hillary Clinton had children in the basement that she was grooming for child abuse and sex trafficking. These are conspiracy theories that go back to Nazi Germany. And this text called the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. You must know about that, Manny.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And
These are old ideas that just been remixed and produced into a new form for the 21st century.
Right.
Before they used to have the Protocols of Zion. Now we have QAnon, and people are looking at videos on YouTube, and Alex Jones spreading the same ideas about drinking blood and secret cabals. These
Right.
are not new ideas.
Yeah, these are not new. They even go back to Russia in the 1920s and the Russian pogroms against the Jews in Russia. So, because the Nazis took it from there, and now the GOP. I mean, if the GOP is not aligned with this kind of thing, then they should clearly state that, which they haven't. Right? They've accepted Marjorie Taylor Greene into
Yes.
Congress, Lauren Boebert, George Santos. I mean, all these nut jobs. And so this is why I think we can safely say this is a fascist threat. And you're calling it a fascist global movement. We know that Steve Bannon,
Yes.
who was in Trump's campaign team and also in the White House in the Trump administration for some time, was over in Italy, was down in Brazil, was working with
That is
all these
correct.
different fascist movements across the United States.
Yes.
Maybe this isn't surprising to our listeners. I don't know if you want to call in, if you have a question, if you have an argument. Please call us at 831-900-5773 at KSQD, 90.7 FM in the Santa Cruz and Monterey Bay Area. We are talking to Manny Otiko, who is a black journalist who has been tracking white supremacy and Russian propaganda and QAnon in the GOP. We are also talking to Ken Scholes, who is a former Southern Baptist preacher, deacon, minister, book burner, who has now come out of the fold. What possessed you, Ken, to burn Dungeons and Dragons books?
It was now they have a word for it. They call it the Satanic Panic.
Okay.
And it's been captured. Actually, you can pick up some of this in Stranger Things on Netflix. That was some of my youth. But it was there was a lot of clamor about how satanic it was, and then there had been a movie, a made-for-TV movie about a D&D kid who went crazy and killed people. And,
oh, really?
It was a big thing. But
wait a second, you played Dungeons and Dragons.
I played
that
it like
must have
crazy.
been hard. Then you had to go. How did you do that? What changed? How did you get into, okay, I'm going to go from enjoying this game, having it be a major central hobby, to I'm going to burn the books?
Right. Well, I mean, even more so. I'm glad I didn't burn my letters from Ray Bradbury encouraging me to be a writer. Glad I kept those, right? I didn't burn those.
Okay.
I was selective in the things I burned.
Well,
but
good.
I had the same feelings of tangled up grief over giving up being a writer, because I was on track to go do that. And so I was suffering. I was in a childhood of neglect and abuse, domestic violence and sexual abuse.
I'm sorry.
And the people who were taking an interest in me were people in these churches where I wasn't getting the bad stuff, physically in churches. That was happening at home.
I see.
I was getting bad beliefs in churches added to a layer of other bad beliefs from home.
Yeah.
And so there was just so much cognitive dissonance. And by the time I was in my 20s, I collapsed in the pulpit and started just sobbing and could not stop. I ended up on antidepressants and slowly transitioning out of the ministry.
Okay, wait,
by way of a focus on the family therapist. But
that's interesting.
I couldn't do it. It was a long slog between age 13 and 14, 15, burning my D&D books at age 16.
Yeah. I'm hearing this from people. I see a lot of these videos on TikTok, and I'm like, people think I'm crazy to be on TikTok, but there's a lot of really raw video footage of people just sharing their stories.
No, I'm headed there too, because Kellyanne tells me that's where my people are. Because Kellyanne and I, we were young puppies together.
Yeah,
brand new married.
Just so I can say, Kellyanne was supposed to be on the show with us. She is now a chaplain who is gay. She has a partner. She doesn't want anyone to know what state she lives in, but she is fighting the LGBTQ plus legislation that's happening all over the South. And I have to note, if people don't know this, there have been 340 anti-LGBTQ plus laws that have either been proposed, are in the works, or have been passed in 2023 alone. In these red states, in these GOP-controlled states, 90 laws targeting medical care for transgendered youth. What do we do about this? Also, I just want to add in on the people of color side of the equation, I'm seeing the most horrifying things coming out of Mississippi, where it seems like they want to reenact Jim Crow laws in the courts and the judicial system. A young man named Rasheem Carter was found, limbs scattered here to there, head severed from the body last year in November in Mississippi. Stories of police doing like hours-long torture sessions on black individuals in their apartments before arresting them and taking them to jail. Are you hearing this, Manny? Am I going crazy?
Yes, I've heard that story about the young man who was found lynched and his head was separated from his body. Yes, I've heard that. Unfortunately, that's been an ongoing problem in Mississippi. That when I heard that story, I wasn't totally surprised, because about 10 years ago, I heard a similar story about a young black man who was found hung. And it sounded like a lynching, but these issues haven't gone away in Mississippi. They still go on from time to time. Hopefully, we'll get more and more media towards this, and then we'll get the federal agency to go and investigate it. Because unfortunately, I've lived in the South before, and I know that in the South it's a Gullah Boy system, and the police are notorious for being connected with the politicians, and everybody knows each other. So it's very easy to make things go away there.
Oh, gosh. Okay, we have a caller, Chris Jennings, on the line. Chris Jennings, are you there?
I am here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Excellent. How are you?
Good. Thank you for calling. Do you have a question or a comment?
Maybe a little bit of both. I wanted to recommend a book first by Krista Tippett. It's called On Becoming Wise. I think it ties a lot of the threads of this radio program tonight, and it will really help people remember what Gil Scott Heron said, which is that the revolution will not be televised, it will not be in the mainstream media. It's still yet to be seen if it'll be online. What Krista Tippett has done is spent years as a journalist, starting in Eastern Europe during the Cold War, studying the Stasi, studying the empire, studying fascism, totalitarianism. And then she came back to the United States and started a podcast called On Being. And over the years, she realized she talked to people in the sciences, religious scholars, rabbis, priests of every faith, Muslims, Jewish, Christian. And they are getting together and building coalitions all over the United States and world. It's not being publicized. There is hope. I recommend everyone read this book on Becoming Wise. And to tie an earlier thread, but how do we communicate with evangelical Christians, with all types of Christians who believe that because the Bible tells them so, that women come from Adam's rib, etc. And I can just share a personal anecdote living in Sacramento, in San Joaquin County, in the Delta, where I come across a lot of Trump supporters. There's churches almost every block, Christian churches of different denominations. And so when people in the community ask me, Chris, what do you think about the fact that the Democrats want to let cross-dressers and trans people into the bathroom of their choice? And they were all Christians asking me. And I said, how many cross-dressers or trans people have you ever seen in this area in our bathroom, first of all? Their answer was 0. I said, what is really going on here? Historically, the GOP in modern times has targeted the most vulnerable population with the least amount of political power. So who are they targeting this election? Trans people, people of color. They do it every cycle. This cycle is more vicious because they're targeting the most marginalized, even within their own ethnicities and communities. This is the most dangerous. And so what I talk to these Republicans in a different part of California about is, what would Jesus do? Jesus, according to their own Bible, spent time with the lepers and the prostitute and the poor, saying it would be easier for a rich person to get into heaven, easier for a camel to get through the eye of a needle than a rich person to get into heaven.
That's right.
And anyone who harms a child should just jump in the ocean, because it's like Luke. I have all these Bible citations used off the top of my head, but we can use the Bible.
Yep, exactly.
And use Jesus' teaching.
Oh, wait, hang on. Ken's got something to say here.
I'm just saying amen, brother. Exactly. Use the teachings. Use the teachings of Jesus, because the teachings of Jesus are contrary to the actions of his followers.
And you think that would get through with that? Thank you so much, Chris.
It did get through.
Oh, it did get through to people?
Okay.
It
works.
Like I said, if you want to follow Jesus, you need to live by his example. And his example was, go to trans kids, go to people of color, go to those that are marginalized in society and love them, empower them, support them against empire. Jesus was a revolutionary, a love warrior. And Jesus preached love, especially for those who had the least amount of power. And if people want to be true followers of Christ, not just believe that Christ existed, but truly follow that example, we can utilize Jesus' message to help open their hearts.
Thank you. That's a beautiful thought. I've actually done that a little bit on TikTok. I do get some pushback, but what are the things?
I've done it live. So.
Thank you, Chris.
In person, I mean. You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for those.
You guys are doing great conversation, great program.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
I want to say that I did put out a video that was about this one part of the Bible, this one thing that Jesus said that I feel like doesn't get enough play, hardly gets any play. And it was when he said, "Where's the kingdom of heaven? It is neither here nor there. It is within you."
Yep, exactly.
If people took that seriously, that would change the game. Now,
can I add something?
Yeah, go, Manny.
Okay, I just want to add to what the caller said, and I agree with his point, is that the GOP is, as he said, they're great at targeting the boogeyman of the week. 30, 40 years ago, it was black people trying to integrate in schools.
Yes.
And it was then after in the 90s, it was women. I remember when I first came to America in 1992. I remember that I watched the presidential elections, and the GOP was targeting single mothers. They were the people bringing America down. Then it was Latinos and the whole immigration thing. Then it was gay people. But as all these groups became integrated, the GOP had to keep looking for a new boogeyman, and the boogeyman of the month is trans people.
It is, and I just want to quote this woman named Nadine Smith in Florida. There are organizers organizing a big march for March the 31st, I believe. I'll have to double check that. Go to Project Caerus, Project Caerus, CAERUS. There are trans and LGBTQ plus students all over the state organizing to walk out in March on that date in Florida. They need help. They need donations. There's a woman named Nadine Smith in Florida who's been working on trans rights, and she says this. This is what fascists do. They sharpen their knives on who they perceive to be the weakest politically. It's why they went after trans kids. I don't even know, it's just so upsetting. Do you guys have any thoughts after that quote?
I will say this, is that one thing that people will need to be cognizant of is that I'm going to quote something from Jesse Jackson Jr., who was a former congressman. I read an article where he said something very fascinating. He said that if you analyze the GOP's central ideas, which is cut taxes and slash social services, they don't have anything for working class people. So they know that. They know if you tell the average working class person, hey, we're going to slash your social services and give tax cuts to rich, they're not going to buy that. But if you can get them to buy into the hate, That is the thing that hooks a lot of people, especially the working class white people. Say, "Oh, the person who's responsible for your life being bad, it's not us. It's those black people, those Hispanic people, those gay people. They're the ones screwing you over."
I know, and this is the thing, because I've seen there are a lot of calls, and I think about this often. How could we unite? Because as quote-unquote working class, middle class, even upper middle class people, the system is not working well for anybody, right? Except for the top 10%, 3%, 1%. We all kind of know that. How is this hatred? I mean, the reason we can't unite is because how can you, as a trans person, as a gay person, as a woman who's pro-choice, as a black person, as an indigenous person, they're also facing a Supreme Court decision that could really hurt them at this moment, which would mean that they don't get to keep their own children in indigenous families and in the indigenous culture. How do you unite with people who are racist against you, or who don't want you in their country, or who don't want you to have rights? Ken, is there any hope? I'm assuming you used to be a Republican when you were in the Southern Baptist Church.
I did. And I was in 2013, 20 years after my first appearance in Houston at an innovative church planters conference for the Southern Baptist Convention, where I was paraded around as a product of the mission field, because the Northwest was a mission field. It was kind of a big win that they had a Northwest kid running around writing gospel songs. And when I went back as a science fiction writer, I was asked, actually, I think it was LeVar Burton and Mae Jemison on the panel at an organization called 100 Year Starship. And we were asked about whether or not people could change. And some of the folks on the panel didn't think we could. And I was the one who could stand up and say, actually, I did. I did change. It was slow. It was painful. I lost everything I believed in. And I found an entirely new world on the other side of it. But it was all fear, Amy. It was all fear that got turned into arrogance.
Fear of going to hell?
Fear of going to hell, fear of being wrong, fear of the real shame and guilt that lays under the surface of most of the European experience in America. If we got to go look in the mirror.
Right.
We really need to look in the mirror and be willing to accept the things that are a part of our heritage. I believe in an integrated authenticity that includes our good, bad, and ugly. Yeah. And it includes working with our allies. I'm an agnostic atheist, but I think Jesus, Sid Banks, Krishnamurti, all these guys, Buddha, they all saw the same elephant. And it's not a hard elephant to see if we're willing to look through open eyes.
Yeah.
And then our understanding can start to notch its way up slowly. But
yeah.
It's hard.
Yeah. Manny, do you have any... Well, actually, Ken, I had one last question for you. When you collapsed, what happened? You said, I collapsed at the pulpit because the cognitive dissonance of being a Southern Baptist and having all these beliefs and other... What was that? What happened that you collapsed?
It all caught up. And I collapsed into a state of major... I was diagnosed 3 months later with major depression. And later, given a diagnosis I didn't understand of post-traumatic stress disorder. And I started a battery of antidepressant medication just to get out of bed in the morning.
Yeah.
I slowly I started leaving the ministry with my college degree rather than going into seminary. I took a job at Target, where I still managed to get in a fight with the guy who was trying to explain white privilege to me in my diversity training, because I didn't understand. I didn't see how a kid who grew up in a trailer the way I did had any kind of privilege.
I see.
But ultimately, slowly, painfully, people loved me to a state of being a better human.
So people who you were in classes with, trainings with, even when you disagreed with them, even when you were being obstinate and refusing to see anything, they still cared about you. You felt that.
Some of them did. And some of them treated me the way I deserved. I was being an asshole.
Okay.
So I deserved some of my treatment. But the ones that loved me,
yes,
they stuck and they cared and they saw me through it, and I found a good therapist who wasn't from Focus on the Family. And, not all therapists, or not all therapists are equal, but it was a path. I got on a path of recovery.
Yeah. Well, listen, we only have about 5 minutes left in the show, and I want to make sure we give people some resources. I hate to cover all this terrible bad news and the I'm not going to say it, show that's happening out there in the red states right now, and which we're going to be dealing with front and center in the 2024 election, whether it's Trump or DeSantis. Hopefully Trump will be in jail by then. What are some sources? I'm going to talk about Swing Left, one of our most active groups in getting out the vote. The Wisconsin Supreme Court election is happening on April the 4th, I believe, and postcards are waiting in the wings for all of y'all to go get them, make phone calls, pair up with Swing Left and also Santa Cruz Indivisible or the Swing Left in your community. Excellent source of information is Popular Information. They are doing leading edge investigative reporting on what's happening in Florida and across the country. They're on Twitter. They're on Substack. People's Action doing incredible door-to-door canvassing and knocking. Donate to them. I donate every month. Gaslit Nation talking about Putin, Ukraine, the history, how Putin has influenced people here in the United States from Trump all the way down through Congress and all the Russian money that's flowed into our Congress and various state legislatures, etc. The Karis Project in Florida, they are organizing a big march to protest the anti-LGBTQ plus laws. Go to Karis Project on the internet. That's CAERUS. I want to mention also, Ken, give us your website, and then could you, any thoughts you have, resources, and then we're going to go to Manny real quick. I want to make sure you guys have equal time.
My website is kenscholes.com, KENSCHOLES.com. And from there, you can find facilitysolutions.com, which is where I do my coaching for folks that might want to talk about their relationship with their church or their community.
Wonderful.
And other resources I'm not really specifically aware of.
Okay. And Manny, what do you think should be done? I know you and I both have a journalistic, we're like, get the information out, get the information out. I think some people are just overwhelmed with the info, you know?
Yeah.
Tell me what you think people should be doing.
I think people should look for independent news sources because sometimes you're not always going to find this information in the mainstream media.
Yeah.
But the key thing is that, the problem with the internet is that there's a fire hose of information, but the key thing is finding good information. But look for alternative sources, look for some good bloggers, look for some good independent journalists. I'd recommend Democracy Now!, which is a publication that doesn't take advertisements.
And they're right here. Actually, they're right here on KSQD every morning, I believe, at 9 a.m.
And also, if you want to
8 a.m. 8 a.m. And Tom Hartman at 4 p.m. every weekday.
And also, if you want to understand fascism and Russian propaganda, read some of the books of Malcolm Nance and also read some of the writings of Julia Davis at The Daily Beast.
Oh, you know what? Malcolm Nance is someone that I think he's actually in Ukraine fighting the Russians. That's what I heard. And former intelligence officer who's written a lot about what Russia and Putin have been up to over the last few years. Manny Otiko, blogger at Medium, black journalist in LA. Thank you so much for joining us. And Ken Scholes, former Southern Baptist teacher, minister, deacon. Thank you so much for sharing your story, being so honest and authentic with us. It was really interesting to hear just everything from both of you. This is Amy Chen Mills on Moment of Truth, and you are on KSQD 90.7 FM.